Aloha. As promised, I'm going through what we did today in class, and I will make you this video and explaining, and I'll go through all these things with you. So I opened up the Excel spreadsheet, and it has the first thing we'll do is we'll write a formula, and the formula that I have is converting temperatures from Fahrenheit to Celsius. If I come into this cell, the formula is equals. It's the Fahrenheit temperature minus 32, and those are in parentheses, times 5 divided by 9. And that gives me, let me get larger. That gives me the formula. If I want to copy it down, I'll just mouse over the bottom right-hand corner, and with the plus sign shows up, I can drag it down, and it copied all the way down. If I don't like the formatting of this, I can select these cells. I can maybe I can reformat to get rid of some of the decimal points or whatever, or leave them as is. So now that's all of the temperatures that we have. Converting from minus 40 is the same thing for Fahrenheit and Celsius. 68 degrees comes out to 20 degrees Celsius. 70 degrees Fahrenheit is 21.1. 85 is about 30 degrees. So there's a simple formula. Let's look at this next one. In this work, in the first tab, over here, I've got a bunch of numbers that are occupying these cells. And I'm going to write some equations and some formulas. We'll see what happens here. The first one I'll write equals sum. And I could type it out, or I could select everything. There's a range of cells from E2 to G4. If I hit enter, it will add that last parenthesis formula, or I can write it out. So that's nice. That's a quick way. That 45, if you add up all the value between 1 and 9, you come up with 45. The other option is equals, I can type these out, E2 plus F2 plus G2 plus E3 plus F3 . Actually easy if I just click on these. So I will add all of those, and you'll notice it comes out to the same thing, because really I'm adding just as much for the same thing. And I mean, there's some things I could do in here, like for example, actually you can make this be a combination. In this formula, if you look up in the formula bar, I added I have that. I could separate these by comma and add these as well. And that will, I mean, that'll give me the same thing. Either way, I've got that range covered. Using this range is a lot easier. It's the easiest way, but it's the cleanest way, at least more efficient for me. Both of these will work, but they do treat them a little bit differently. When I've written formulas like the second one, sometimes I accidentally forget to include everything, and so the answer is not quite as accurate as I want to be, or it's easier to make a mistake when you have more moving parts. Something a little bit more parsimonious, something a little more simple, that makes it less likely to make mistakes. But use whatever you need for your situation, but there can be a reason why you want one over the other. There's another formula we're going to look at. It's the concatenate formula. So I click on this cell. The concatenate is shift 7. It's this thing right here. And what that means is you're going to append two things together. You'll join them together. So the contents of E3 and F3. So Excel's interesting because in a lot of other programming languages, if you're doing data analysis, you learn a programming language to work through huge sets of data. Most of the languages, when you designate the equivalent of a cell or variable, you designate it either to do text or to have a number, not both. Excel will take both. And so even though which means that now we've got this, it looks like 45, it looks like the value of the rows above, but you'll notice it's left justified. I can come back in here and tell it, force it to justify. The default is to keep it over there on the left. If it's text, if it's on the right, it'll be a number. Your byte, for example, if I input some numbers, you notice on the right. If I put some words, it puts it on the left. That's how it does the justification. So now I've got these three things. They look the same. What happens if I put the sum formula equals sum, and I will add up all three of those? You notice the value is only 90. The reason why it's 90 is because this cell, E8, is text, where the 4 and the 5 are next to each other, really as a word, as letters, not as a number. So like, for example, if I'm going to put some numbers here, and then I put some sort of a word in here, I put some more numbers, and I want to sum those together. Excel will go through all of these, and it only sums up the numbers, which is what it did here with the sum formula. But sometimes if I'm reading a bunch of data from an alternate source, I will want that to actually look like a number. And so I'm pulling numbers out from a string of text or something like with other characters in there. I might actually want that to be a number. And so you can make that a number by using a formula. So I'm going to do this plus this plus that. And now it will treat that third one, the E8, it'll treat it like a number. And so both of these will span the same cells, but now it gets treated as a number because I put it into a formula equals that rather than just as part of a range. And that gives you a slightly different result. Okay, so let's look at another application of doing formulas that we have on this worksheet. On columns J through L, Tui has a bunch of grades that he had earned throughout the semester. He wants to figure out what he needs to get on the final exam to maintain in the A range. And if you want to figure out the weight, all of these sum to 1. And because these are the apportioned out sections for his grades, if we want to figure out how these contribute towards his grades, we could do this formula. We can multiply this 90% times 10%, and we can, if we do this, we'll figure out what his grade is. So as of right now, if he skips the final, he's going to walk out of the semester with a 72%, 71.8%, which is why that's a little bit lower. He's been getting 90s and upper 80s and low 90s. But the reason why that says 71.8% because it's treating the value of J8 as being 0 because there's nothing in there. If we can put in a bunch of grades in here, let's put in a 50%. What will his grade be? If it's a 50% of the final, he'll walk out of the semester. His transcript will say 81.8%. If he gets 85%, we're looking at that's a B plus, but 88.8%. We want something higher, put in 90. That's not quite there. What if we put 95? Now we're looking at 90.8. So somewhere between 90 and 95. You could keep inputting values until you get to exactly where you need to be. So if he gets a 91% on his final exam, that means he'll end the semester with an A minus still. So that would be like the lowest score you can get if you want to do some like a threshold analysis there. You plug in different values. Later on in the semester, we'll look at a little more precise way to figure it out. But if you have these formulas in place, you can do the what if scenarios. So that's a pretty powerful thing in here. Let's go to the second worksheet, and we have some values in here. There's some assets that you can buy. There's some S&P 500, gold, a barrel of oil, a bushel of wheat, pounds of copper, things that you could purchase. Let's look at the percent change from September 20th to September 21st. This is real data. Percent change, you look at the difference between the two and you divide it by the old. So new minus old, all of that divided by the old will give you a percent change. And so new minus old divided by the old. So S&P 500 went down by 2.5%. Well, these are all currencies. I guess I could turn them into currencies. Uh, I'm going to format the cells, make them look a little bit nicer. Doesn't matter. It's that way. But now that I have the formula, I can just copy that formula all the way down, and we can see what these values are. If there's only 5, I can look at them and say, okay, the middle one is, and then quickly figure it out. But let's use a formula. Sometimes you might have hundreds of records and you want to figure this out. So what I did is I selected this cell. That's where I'm working from. And then I'll come up to, there's a lot of places where you can find out information on formulas. You can go to the search menu right up here is one. You can go to ChatGPT, Google, YouTube, the Excel. Oh, that's invisible. Whatever. The Excel Bible. You're ready to hold it close to me. The Excel Bible, well, you can find all sorts of neat things. You're looking at the electronic version in the library right now, or some of you have that book. There's lots of resources, but this one, I think, is probably actually the fastest, easiest one to use, at least in my opinion. So right up here, have your active cell, and if you click on it, not like I will do, you'll have this insert function dialog box, and you can type a description. So if I want to have, well, I could do middle, see if it likes that. I typed in middle. A couple of functions that it had are median and mid. And so the mid, if you read the suggestions right here, it says returns the characters from the middle of the string or text given a starting point and length. Well, that's pretty cool, but I'm not looking at that. What I'm looking at is the middle number. And so what I can do is I'll click on median, and it says return to median or the number in the middle of the set of given numbers. That's what I want. I'll click OK, and it tells me, it assumes I probably want D2. Oh, that's pretty snazzy. D2 to T7, the middle number for these. Yeah, let's grab, and I'll hit enter. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's what I want. Oh, well, equals median. I select those cells. Now the median value is negative 0.9. That corresponds to wheat. If I want the smallest one, there's a couple functions I can do. I'll do smallest. Or there's a formula called small, returns the kth small value in a data set, for example, the fifth smallest number. So if you put where it says array, you put the range of cells you're considering, and then K would be if you want the smallest, the minimum value. You want the second smallest, the third smallest. We only have 5. So if I put the fifth smallest, really that will give me the biggest one. But I'll do small. And for the arguments, I will pick these cells. And then I want the smallest one, which means, and it gave me the number. I'm going to turn that to a percent, because that'll match what I have. Minus 2.5, the smallest one. So S&P 500 have the lowest rate of return. In fact, it's so low it's negative. For largest, if you think you might want to know what a formula is, you can actually start typing it out. You put the equal sign. You want the maximum. Oh, look, there's max A, max A, max if. If you click on these, it'll give you some information about this. Returns maximum value among the cells specified by a given set of conditions or criteria. You can put some sort of qualification in there. Largest number in the field of records that match the conditions you specify. Largest value in a set of values does not. So you kind of get an idea of what you want. So that means I'll just go over the max. That's another way you can quickly try to figure out what formula you want. The biggest one was oil, which went up by about 1/3 of 1%. Okay, so there we have that. The next thing we want to look at is anchoring cells. Anchoring cells is really useful if you're writing a formula that and you're moving around and you want to make sure that you keep a specific cell somewhere. So let's look at, I'm going to delete these. I'll put them back in. The criteria is in cell H6, write a formula that adds the cell holding 1 to the cell holding 4. So we have H2 plus H3, and that gives us a value of 5. What happens if we copy that cell to the ones next to it? You'll notice it's not adding those same cells before. When we were looking at this one, it's the third and fourth cells above. When I copied that, it has in reference to the third and fourth cell above it as well. What if that 5, I really like that 5 and I want to keep it when I move things around? I'm going to put I'll anchor that with a $sign. I think it's what F4 will anchor everything. Whoops. So I put the $sign in front of the letter or the column heading, which anchors which column it is. And then I will now anchor the row number. You can anchor just a column or just a row. So when you move it around, it'll copy things over. So what happens if now I've got that 7? What happens if I copy it right below? I have the value of 10 because the I3, which is 1, 2, is 4 numbers above it. It's still 4 above it, but I went down 1, and so now it's 1 above it. But the other 5 is anchored. And so 5 plus 5 is 10. If I copy this one over here, now I still have that 5 anchored, but 4 above it is 3. And so now the resulting value is 8. So if I copy this again, it's going to add 5 and 6, which is 11. One more down, it adds 5 and 9. Let's look at that. So those cells. And if I do one more below that, oops, if I copy that one more down, it just has a 5 because that 5 is still there, but then that number underneath is nothing. And so it's just 5. So that's what anchoring does. It holds constant where you're a reference to a cell without moving it around, either for column or width, however you want to do that. Okay, so let's look at this next one. Let's convert everything from Fahrenheit to Celsius. So I put in that same formula. Fahrenheit minus 32, close off the parenthesis, as it times, no, it is times 5 divided by 9. Okay, so I've got that. And now I can copy that formula all the way around. And if I were to look right here, I can sum all of those values together in the selection. But so now that's, I just converted the temperatures over from that table. Okay, so let's look at this last column things that we have in here. There's some, I thought it might be interesting to look at some formulas and formulas that don't have any inputs. This one is called equals now, and this formula has whatever the date and time. So right now it is 9:22 at about 6 p.m. This one is pi. It's a value of pi, so 3.14159 and on to infinity. This formula is called today. It doesn't return the time, it just returns the date, whatever the computer clock is. These two are kind of similar. I wanted to talk a little bit about if-then statements. We'll go into more detail about these, but this is a really important formula, one that you will probably use a lot. An if-then statement takes in, there's 3 arguments in here. The first one, there's a conditional argument that's either going to be true or false. If it's true, it will move on to what the first one is. If it's false, it'll do the very last one. So right here is, did you pass the prerequisites for the next class? True or false? So if it's false, you put that in there. Should you take the next class? It says take the necessary prerequisite. I'll type in true. You can put some condition in there that will verify that's either true or false. If it's true, then yes, take the next class. And so it'll go back and forth. That's a pretty simple true-false statement. let's look at one that's a little bit, you can nest these with each other. So I put this in here. If the contents of this cell is greater than or equal to 90%, and then the value result is A. Otherwise, you move on. If the contents of that is greater than or equal to 80%, then it's a B. Otherwise, move on. If the contents is greater than 70%, give it a C, 60% a D, and if it's not anything else, and then we're left with an F. So if I put 30% in here, that's an F. Put 95%, that's an A. All these values that I put in here, if I wrote it correctly, within the 60% range is a D, 99%, A, whatever you put in here, if you write it correctly, you should get the result that you want. So that's kind of I think that's pretty cool. Okay, let's look at this last part that we have. We have a budgeted amount. Joshua he spends a bunch of money every month, and then he gets paid a bunch, and that there's something that's left. So with his budget, he spends a bunch on food, cell phone, rent, utilities, etc. If we wanted to know what his total amount to spending, let's use the sum formula equals sum. So every month he spends with what he had budgeted, $3,435. His net pay is $3,500. How much cushion room or wiggle room does he have? We can look at this and say, well, that's easy, 65. But there's some value in putting this into a formula with Excel, and I'll show you in just a minute. So the amount of extra I'm going to do is pay minus his expenses. And there we see that it's 65. And if we look at, he wants to buy a $500 surfboard, how long is it going to be before he buys that surfboard? So I'll select the surfboard, divide it by his extra payments. That will tell me the number of months he has until he can purchase that surfboard. That's a lot of decimals. And so it's really almost 8 months, unless he makes some changes. Because we have a formula in here for everything, we can come through and make some changes. If he really wants that surfboard, maybe he can make some adjustments for food. Maybe let's drop this down to 400. Let's do 425. It might be okay to shift or to shave off $25. Now we're looking at 5.5 months. You can't change. That's his cell phone plan. He can't quite change that. That's the minimum bare bones one. Rent, you can't really change that. Utilities, that's probably not going to be changing. Transportation, maybe if you rode his bike a little bit more. Let's ride a bike a lot more. You'll be able to hit the waves more on a surfboard. So let's bring that from 300 down to 200. What does that do? Okay, now he has 190 extra every month. So just under 3 months, we're not quite there. You don't want to shortchange the Lord. Keep tithing where that is. You don't want to change savings either, but let's look at his entertainment. If he's going to be spending more time surfing, maybe that means he won't have to spend as much entertainment because that's what he'll do for his entertainment. Let's drop this in half. We can extend that a little bit more. If he does that, he'll have 290 extra cushion every month, which he can put in towards the surfboard, which means in just under 2 months, he'll have saved up enough to buy his surfboard. Well, great. I hope you enjoyed this Excel session. And Excel is a really powerful tool. You can do great things with that. Thank you. Mahalo.